brains! As promised, this is the first in a 3-part series on how our memory works and how that applies to strategies on note-taking, studying, and test-taking. You know, the fun stuff. We often think that if we don't do well on tests, it's because we have a terrible memory. That's a common complaint for those of us with ADHD. So I looked into what might help, and here's what I found. There's nothing wrong with our memory. Wait, what? How can that be true? Is it true? Well, yes and no. What most of us are referring to when we use the term memory is long-term memory, as in the test is in 2 weeks, can I remember what I learned today? No, terrible memory. But ADHD doesn't really affect our long-term memory. There's technically nothing wrong with our brain's ability to store and retrieve information. That doesn't mean we don't have trouble remembering stuff. Trust me, I do. What it does mean is that our memory problems are typically working or short-term memory problems. So why can't I remember things? Bear with me while I try to explain an intensely complicated process and a solution for hacking it in less than 5 minutes. It might not be as entertaining as cat videos, but it's so much more educational. Oh, what the heck? Let there be cats. Working memory, which includes short-term memory, is like our mental plate. It's where we keep information while we're using it. For example, remembering a teacher's question while we think of the answer and then raise our hand to answer it. Or remembering what the teacher said long enough to write it down. That's working memory. It has a lot to do with paying attention, and it's one of the executive functions that's really impacted by our ADHD. Which is why sometimes we know what to do, but halfway through doing it, no, completely forgot. Why is that a problem? Because working memory is what we use to transfer information from short-term memory into long-term memory. This process is called encoding, and it's the first and critical step in the memory process. And again, usually where things go wrong. The process of encoding always involves recoding, which is basically taking the information from the format in which it was delivered to us and translating it into something we can actually understand. For example, a teacher could say that the first phone call was made in 1876, but those are just words until you picture the numbers 1876 next to a telephone. And imagine hearing the inventor, Alexander Graham Bell, say into the phone, "Mr. Watson, come here. I want to see you." In school, class lectures are often when we begin encoding or learning information, and taking notes can really help with this process. Taking notes helps keep students focused and engaged while the teacher is talking. Super important because you can't remember what you weren't paying attention to in the first place, and it also gives something they can study later. That's probably why many teachers actually require that their students take notes, although they don't seem to bother to teach them how. But for those of us with ADHD, this is a double-edged sword. Taking notes can be helpful, in some classes even essential, but it can also be overwhelming and frustrating because it relies so heavily on our working memory. Think about what taking notes requires. Not only do we have to pay attention to and process what the teacher is saying, we have to decide what's important enough to write down and hold it in our brains while we actually write it in a way that we can actually go back and read it later, all while the teacher's still talking. No wonder the stress of taking notes has been compared to playing chess at a competitive level. That's true for anyone, but again, it's especially challenging for those of us with ADHD. Some students make it easier on their brains by giving up on trying to understand the information and just copying down as much as they can. And some give up on taking notes entirely and just try to process and remember the information all in their head. The problem is, much like Goldilocks and the 3 bears, okay, cats, one of these solutions is too much and the other is too little. Copying down everything the teacher says makes it so we don't have time to actually process any of it now, essentially deferring the learning and encoding till later. And even if we stay totally focused during the lecture, without notes we can review, we're probably gonna forget what we've learned in 2 weeks when the test rolls around. So what's a brain to do? Find a note-taking solution that's just right. One awesome, amazing, wonderful teacher whose name I totally forget taught me a note-taking technique that I will never forget. It may not be right for everyone, but it's the one that worked best for me. Divide a piece of notebook paper in 3. During a lecture, write only in the left third column and only what you think you might need in order to remember what the heck the teacher was talking about in class later. This could be keywords, dates, pictures, whatever you think you'll need. Right after class if possible, later that evening if not, while it's still fresh in your mind, use the rest of the page to write out the lecture in your own words. Use your notes in the left column to cue your memory of the lecture. This is helpful because it A, encourages us to review our notes right away. It's use it or lose it with this technique. That's not gonna make sense in a week or two. B, allows us to focus more on learning/encoding in class than if we were just trying to write everything down right away. And C, helps us effectively recode the information we're encoding. Since we're writing it out in our own words and at our own pace, it's easier to make sense of it in a way that we'll be able to remember it later. 2 final tips. Final? Get it? 1, it's easier to encode information if it's not completely foreign to us. So getting familiar with the material, like reading the chapter that the teacher's going to be talking about the night before is actually really helpful. Our memory depends on connections, and the more we can make, the better. 2, if you're worried you'll miss something or won't be able to remember enough to write it out later, check with your school about accommodations. Many schools will find a way to provide you with an extra set of notes from another student or even the outline from the professor. That's it for this week. For more on encoding and recoding, check out the links below, and for part 2, click here. Next week. Bye, brains! I'd stay longer, but I've got a lot of studying to do.